Hello friends, welcome to the lecture Religious and Devotional Hindi Films during the Colonial period. In the earlier lecture on the same theme, we talked about that how the religious and devotional films they were being made during the colonial period and how they were very important from the point of view of India's ancient history and culture, and how these kinds of films, when they were being made, they were also trying to reflect the culture of India. And at the same time, some of the national movement leaders, as I told you, Tilak, in a way praised these films as the Swadeshi films, because many of the foreign films which were coming to India and which were being viewed by the Indian audiences, such kind of concerns they were being raised that they were trying to corrupt the Indian mind, as the European as well as the American culture was being shown in those films. So there was also some kind of a concern that how the Indian films they should be made, and filmmakers like Dada Saheb Phalke and later others, they made all concerted efforts to make the Swadeshi films. And when we talk about cinema, then we also find that films are not only artistic creations for that matter, but at the same time they reflect the society, and not only they are works of art, but they are also reflection of society in that sense. And we find that films are also trying to talk about the historical past, and we also have to see the film's role in history and society, and films also as a historical source, where we find that cinema can be seen as a source of historical inquiry. So Mark Farrow says that films are not only the product of the time but also agents of history as well, because they are also trying to cater to the audience about the past. And we find that how cinema is a representative of the society, and it also acts as an agent of change in the society. And some of the critics like Sumita Chakravarti has also shared this idea and emphasized that cinematic culture can thus be seen as a mediated form of national consciousness. So we find that how the culture which is being shown in cinema, and how the idea of national consciousness which is being seen, so there are certain connections between them. And we also have to realize that there are certain, even if we in a way don't pay attention to cinema as a source of history, despite that it will exist. So it is some kind of a deliberate choice of the historians to incorporate the audiovisual material in the process of history writing. So even if the historians are going to neglect it, then even then it will exist. So it will be history through the pictures. And other scholars like Rachel Dwyer focused on the role of cinema in keeping religion a debatable topic in public, and she made the case that unlike state-owned media, privately controlled film upholds religion in the front and center of popular culture. And she sought to deconstruct how the media shaped religious rituals. And we see that how films they have also been influenced by the socio-economic, cultural and political conditions of their times, and they do not in a way merely reflect these influences, but they play a pivotal role in shaping and gradually constructing cultural identities within society. And we find that films that are not religious but devotional, they demonstrate the individual's spirituality, virtue, fate and the result of karma, which ultimately relate to the devotional idea. So Dyer focused on how viewers from the diverse social, ethnic and economic backgrounds approach different cinema genres in unique ways. And many times we find that not every religious film has to be appealing to every segment of the population, but religious films like Krishna Janma had a special attraction for the uneducated and appealed to the Hindus of all classes throughout the country. And we find that from 1920 to 1924, as you can see on the screen as well, Indian cinema was riding the crest of a bhakti wave of its creation, led by Dada Saheb Phalke and joined by other equally interested persons. And how Indian cinema began to unfold its culture and continuing spiritual tradition to create a new national ethos. So we find that in the beginning part, in the initial part, so many religious and devotional films they were being made, and Dada Saheb Phalke and others they devoted a lot of time to such kind of features. And I remember that how Dada Saheb Phalke, when he was watching the life of Christ, at that point of time he realized that he had to make something for the Indian masses, how Indian masses they have to be shown the Indian pictures. So that was one of the concerns at that point of time. And we find that with this idea he started his first film, Raja Harishchandra, because he wanted to show the Indian picture to the Indian audiences and how the Indians they could relate with the cultural aspect. And we see that how in the initial years of cinema production, Bombay City and province religious films were the favorite subjects of newly emerged film companies. And we find that so many Indian gods like Ram, Krishna, Hanuman and others they emerged, and how they were being shown on the screen. And the Bhakti movement in its known form preached divine unity, and in cinema it was harnessed to foster the ideal of one Indian nation, as you can see on the screen, or nation or Indian nationhood. So this idea of Indian nationhood was very important at that point of time, because the national movement was also in a way was undergoing, was also could be seen where so many people they were participating, whether through the organized parties or through various kinds of bodies like the revolutionaries. For that matter, during this particular period we find that a lot of revolutionaries they also established various societies where they were also in a way participating in the national movement. So various kinds of bodies or individuals they were engaged in the national movement for that matter. And we see that when such kind of a participation was happening during this particular period, then in a way it was also very important from the point of view of the audience as well, because the audience, Indian audience could relate with these kinds of features. So we find that such kind of portrayals they were not only restricted to the colonial period, but at the same time these kinds of portrayals could be seen even after independence as well. And these kinds of portrayals were very integral to the Indian audiences, because how the colonial rulers they tried to impose English language in 1835 onwards, and they were in a way trying to destroy Indian culture from that point of view. And we realize that such kind of portrayals were very integral to the Indian culture from that particular perspective. And when you talk about the idea of Indian nationhood or Indian nation for that matter, then we realize that how the socio-religious reform movements which were started in the 19th century. So religion is not one thing, how it is connected to the social norms, and the social norms they were not devoid of the religious aspects. Both of them they were in a way interlinked. And we find that there were other important historians and social scientists, those who have worked on various kinds of aspects, and how we find that how Gandhi, for that matter, Gandhi was also talking about these kinds of aspects where he was in a way glorifying the idea of sainthood. We also in a way realize that scholars like Gautam Kaul, and he says that the proper credit has not been given to the contribution of religious films, and one of the main reasons why the screen became such a popular form of entertainment was because of the religious films. So we have to also in a way realize that how these kinds of films which were being made, and how in a way they were fascinating to the audience, how they were trying to show the curiosity of the audience, and the idea of modernity had also come during this time. And so in that context, we find the scholars have argued that religious cinema was a popular genre in many of the national languages of those times, not only Hindi, but we find that in all languages we find that religious films they were being made. And if we try to compare that, India was one country where so many languages they exist, and how films they were being made in all these languages. And we find that Pranjali Bandhu, as you can see on the screen, has emphasized the importance of religious themes and considered theatre as the fifth Veda, the mass media by which the Vedic works are transferred to the illiterates. And the uneducated viewers bowed down in worship, believing the virtual deities to be genuine whenever they materialized on television as living, breathing beings plucked from the frigid pages of ancient text and dramas. So we find that how the scholars, those who are in this field, they try to in a way tend to see them, and they have in a way argued that they were also being used for the patriotic purposes, and how Bengal and Maharashtra, both these places, a lot of activity with regard to the national movement was happening. And we find that scholars like B.V. Dharap, he traced the making of religious films, as you can see on the screen, and argued that religious films are produced by planning rather than by accident. Dadasaheb Phalke was anxious to select a subject with the largest mass appeal. So we find that how Phalke's religious cinema enjoyed immense popularity not only in Bombay but also in other urban centers of India. So we see that though filmmaking started in that particular region, but at the same time how films they were being shown in other parts of India, and how they became popular in these regions. And we find that apart from Phalke, there were other filmmakers, those who were dealing in these kinds of ideas and themes. And apart from individual filmmakers, we also find that it was a period of the studios. So many film studios, they were also engaged in making films which were on the religious and devotional ideas. And we find that though India is a multilingual, multi-religious, multi-regional country where you will find a lot of differences on various aspects, but we find that they are also united by their shared deep beliefs in religion. And we find that in 1930s and 40s it was not only restricted to the northern regions, but even in southern India, as Pranjali Bandhu has talked about in 1930s and 40s, so many films which were made on the religious aspects, they were also being made. And one of the leaders, as I told you, was Tilak, who was talking in the framework of Swadeshi films. Then there was another leader, Satyamurthy. As Satyamurthy, he was trying to mobilize cinema and stage artists for the national cause. And we find that Satyamurthy recognized the potential of cinema as an instrument of change. So he was also making films for the elections as well. When elections they were being contested, Satyamurthy realized the importance of cinema, and he made films for in a way winning elections. And as we were talking about how the devotional films, they were talking about the reformist saints, those who were talking about the idea of reforms, and the reforms they were very well needed in the Indian society, where some of the issues of dowry or caste system, child marriage, all of them, alcoholism, they were to be dealt and one of the scholars, Devendra Sharma, who is a professor in California, he shared his ideas in this context, that how 1930s films were based on religious themes. You can see on the screen that he talked about Ramayana, Mahabharata and Shakuntala. He talked about social reform and how important role of cultural preservation and social change he pointed out, and how all of them they proved useful for nation building. So how these films they were connected to the idea of a nation building that was being talked about by Professor Devendra Sharma in an interview. And when we tend to understand them in the context of what all was happening during the national movement, we are also able to relate with it. We are able to understand it in the context in which he communicated these ideas. So that was one aspect which one finds during this particular period. And we also in a way realize that such kind of portrayals during that particular period, because how people they tend to understand religion now, how the kind of faith which they have even now, as you can see in the recent times, the religious tourism has increased. During this year only we found one of the largest, or rather largest congregation of people in the Kumbh in Prayagraj. So there are so many aspects which are associated with religion, and how when you see these films like the religious films, or for that matter devotional films, so they were trying to connect people in a certain manner through the ideas which were relevant to all of them. And at the same time we find that they were talking about the cultural preservation and social change, which were also very very useful from the idea of nation building. So we find that such kind of portrayals they were very very important, and how they were relevant from the point of view of society. And we also have to in a way realize that how Indian nationalism is also connected with religion in that sense, and how the religious nationalism has been studied in other media such as literature and chromolithography. And so we have to in a way study it in the framework of cinema as well, and one has to also arrive at certain kinds of conclusions when one is watching such kind of films, because films, as they say, are the reflection of society in a certain manner. So one has to in a way understand cinema from that particular perspective as well. One has to in a way see that how these kinds of scenes they were relevant in India, and we also in a way realize that one has to see the various kinds of developments which happened during this particular period, where we find that so many people they visited various kinds of pilgrimage sites as well. So this was another important aspect which you find during this time. And as you can see on the screen as well, that how the kind of influence the religious and devotional films they create. So we find that there may be a distinction of influence among classes. Movies have a profound moral impact on all of them, and film effects may be seen in ways they shape value patterns, real behavior and views on life. The ideals necessary for societal renewal were portrayed in the religious film. So how the religious and the devotional films they were trying to impact the society in a certain manner, how they were trying to shape the value patterns, the real behavior, as well as the views on life, that how we see life, how we tend to understand it. So these kind of ideals which were also very very important from the point of view of the societal renewal, they were also being reflected in the religious film. When you talk about the way films they impact society, and when we compare it with Satyagraha of which was initiated by Mahatma Gandhi and how Raja Harishchandra could also be seen in that particular framework, that he was also trying to relate it with in this particular framework, where he had some kind of steadfastness with regard to his ideal of truth. He wanted to be truthful, and for that he was ready to sacrifice everything. So Raja Harishchandra and Satyagraha could also be related, and we also find that many times the common people, they had the chance to experience the spiritual leanings as gods and goddesses came to life in the movies. And many times we find that how people, they stand in queues in the cinema halls and the temples, and how Ramayana and Mahabharata, they have been venerated, as you can see on the screen. How the religious and devotional films, they were famous during the silent era, and when sound came to India in 1931, religious films, they revived in a big way. And sound as a tool of cinema also became more effective in influencing the masses. They grew more attached to religious hymns through the sound, which made them more deeply connected to the films. And how we find that songs, they were also very, very important from the Indian point of view. And in every Indian film, you will find that there are various songs. So various kinds of bhajans which were there in the religious films, in the devotional films, and how these bhajans, they were known to the masses, and the popularity of song was an important aspect which we find in the Indian films, which we in a way see during this time. So how cinema is in a way able to reflect these kinds of concerns, and how the general public was also interested in watching the kind of things which were being shown. And we find that how the devotional films, which were based on the lives of the great saints, they were trying to instill the idealistic thinking in the general public, whether Sant Tukaram or Eknath, all of them, they were important from that point of view. So with this, I'd like to end the discussion. Thank you very much.